sense to do. And then we will, with what time we have, we'll have a few updates on the working groups that are underway, and the edits that folks have suggested for our table of contents, for our report, et cetera. And then go through some next steps.
Ignore my hand. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. All right. And okay, I can see folks. So I'm just making sure I can see if people are raising hands. Okay, so with that, let's get into the meat of this. And what I'm going to do is spend just a few minutes framing for us what it is that we are working to do here, and just some context, input, background that I think will be helpful to inform our conversation, and then open up the discussion. So as I go through these next few slides, please feel free to drop questions in the chat as they come up, and then we'll pause and take a look at those, and then we'll have an open discussion. All right. So this is just a reminder of our expectations, which you all have seen a couple of times. Sharing the implementation hat might be a good one to think about tonight. Okay. And this is where we are in our process. So we're in the meat of things, and racing towards that January 15th deadline. I sent you all an email just a few minutes ago, members of the task force, with links to these different references. Some of them you already, well, actually all of them you have somewhere, but I wanted them to be sort of right available for you. As we go along, if you need a link, because as we're having the conversation, just drop it in the chat and we'll make sure everybody gets all those. Okay, so once again, want to just ground us in our legislative charge and the sort of context for what we're doing, just because it can be easy for us to go in 100 different directions, and just want to make sure we remember what it is that we've been asked to do, and then what the context is right now in terms of what's in law that we can look to. So the first thing you see here is what we looked at, looked at over the last couple of meetings around the charge of the task force per se is to propose an employee compensation scale for early childhood development providers that accounts for employee role, credentials, and experience. So coming up with a proposed scale is in fact something that is part of our deliverable. So we are expected to do that. And that scale should account for, at the very least, those three things: employee role, credentials, and experience. Similarly, the pay equity fund, which again, that is the pool of money that is being put up against this priority, is intended to support the implementation of an employee compensation salary scale to increase the minimum compensation for employees of early childhood development providers. So we talked last time a little bit about a lot about eligibility and who's considered those employees. And then the third thing here, this is not specific to the task force per se, but the broader context of what is in the Birth to 3 Act, which obviously is, very closely linked to what we're doing here. And so you see here language straight from the Birth to 3 Act that establishes that ECE shall develop a competitive lead teacher and teacher assistant compensation scale for child development facilities that achieves parity. And then the definition of parity in Birth to 3 is compensation for an individual that includes compensation equivalent to the average base salary and fringe benefits of an elementary school teacher in DCPS, with the equivalent role, credentials, and experience. So again, we have that role, credentials, and experience as the three sort of triumvirate of factors that we're asked to look at. And then parity is specifically to DCPS.
Hey, Abby, can I break in for just a second? Because I see the chairman has joined us.
Oh, good. I can't see him. I can only see 4 people.
Okay. And I don't know if Kelly's with us, but Michael is.
I don't see Kelly. So welcome, Chairman Mendelson. Sorry you were not on the small strip of faces that I was able to see. Thank you so much for joining us. And so, Michael, you get to have a solo swearing in.
All right, so after this, we'll leave one other person to be sworn in.
That's right.
Yes.
Oh, Kelly says she's here
Oh.
in the chat. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know why I can't see her, but that's probably me. Great. So then that would leave nobody.
I don't see her either, though.
I don't think she's on as a panelist.
But she's in the chat.
Yeah, she's not in as a panelist, so she's got 2, but I'm gonna promote her now. All right, so I just promoted the 2 names associated with her. Sorry about that, Kelly. I just didn't see you. All right, so she's in here now.
All right, I still don't.
Cameron, you probably have to scroll through. I see her 2.
I'm coming.
There she is.
Yeah, and she's getting some feedback. You may have 2 computers on or 2.
I did.
All right. All right. I'm sorry to be interrupting everybody, but everybody needs to be sworn in. So, 2 folks.
Okay.
So this is what we're going to do. Everybody else already did this. So you get to watch and see if these 2 individuals do it right. This could affect your grade going forward. Okay, so this is the deal. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to raise your right hand, repeat after me, and I'm going to say aye, and I'm going to pause, and you're going to say your name. And then I'm going to say, do solemnly swear or affirm, and you can pick one to swear or affirm. And I'll go through the rest of it. So just remember, the hardest part is that I'm going to say aye and then pause. And if it takes all night before you remember to say your name, we will wait all night. All right, are we ready? And I should note, there's a written copy of the oath that you have to sign and submit. So please do that. All right, so if you would raise your right hand, repeat after me. I,
Kelly Sally,
Michael Nadowitz,
do solemnly swear or affirm
affirm
that I will faithfully execute.
that I will faithfully execute.
All right, we're going to start over again. Well, you have to repeat everything I say.
Okay.
Pick a word or 2. Okay, we'll start over. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I,
Michael Nadowitz,
Kelly Denise Sally,
do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly
do
swear
swear or affirm
that I will faithfully execute the laws
that I will
that I
faithfully
will
execute the laws
of the United States of America
of the United States of America
and of the District of Columbia,
and of the District of Columbia,
and will, to the best of my ability,
and will to the best of my ability
preserve, protect, and defend
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
and will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duty
of the office of member
of the office of member
of ECE Equitable Compensation Task Force
of ECE Equitable Compensation Task Force,
which I am about to enter.
which I am about to enter.
Congratulations. And what am I doing here? Yes, thumbs up. I have to remember what I'm trying to do. Okay, so congratulations to each of you. And thank you to all of you again for your willingness to work on this task force. I can tell you that quite a number of council members are anxious for you to complete your work. And I don't mean by that to rush you, but rather to say that this is important and that members are caring about what you're doing. So it should be of great help to us. And with that, again, thank you for letting me interrupt. Abby, thank you. And I'm going to bid my leave. Don't forget to fill out your form and submit it. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All right. So let's get back to it. Let me share that screen again. Okay. So, again, looking at the birth to 3 language, which specifically, again, calls out parity with equivalent role, credentials, and experience. So, so that's the salary scale, sort of, the parameters that we are working within here. And I want to note that, as you can see in the Birth to 3 Act, it explicitly calls out benefits as part of compensation. So I want to just note and acknowledge that. And to also be clear that our conversation tonight is really going to focus on salary per se. So I just want to give people the heads up that that's going to be our particular focus in terms of the content of what the salary scale would look like. And we'll think about the kinds of things we want to talk about in terms of benefits at a later date. Okay, so a few basic principles. Again, this is all basically review, but I just want us all to have this in our heads as we open the conversation. So the idea here is that the salaries on the scale should not be differentiated based on setting. So center, home versus school, that's not the differentiator. And it should not be differentiated based on age of children served. So whether you are serving infants, toddlers, or 3- and 4-year-olds, that is not the differentiator. So that's on the one hand. It is differentiated, as we've noted in each of those in the legislative language on the previous slide. It is differentiated based on the credential held, the relevant credential held, based on role. So, for example, lead teacher versus assistant teacher, with the various terms that those currently have in our licensing language, and experience. And that there's overall, sort of conceptually, the principle of a salary scale that supports a career ladder. So part of what we're doing here is about equity, and part of it is around professionalizing this field. And so incentivizing progression in the profession as part of a career ladder is, again, part of sort of conceptually the principle behind what we're doing. So what you see here is, again, going back to the work of Power to the Profession, which we looked at last time, but I think is just really helpful framing for us throughout this work. Power to the Profession explicitly looked at that early educator category that is one of multiple categories in the broader field, but that key category, and it has these three different distinct designations within that early educator category. And the way that that Power to the Profession distinguishes these is to look at both the credentials that are associated with these different roles, and the different responsibilities that we have. So so without getting into too much detail on this, the basic concept here is that ECE 1, which is the sort of entry into the profession, there's an assumption around a credential that is, you know, something like a CDA, right? And sometimes some of the languages can be different in different places, but plays a support educator role. And then the ECE2, which is associated with an associate's degree and plays in some cases a lead educator role and in some cases a support educator role. So, you know, for example, in our public school settings, the ECE2 role is going to be in a support role at that degree level. But in our center or home-based settings, there can be lead educators in, you know, in the associate degree, and then the bachelor's degree or beyond, which again, lead educator role in all of those settings. So that is sort of conceptually a way of thinking about this progression, this professional progression through the work of Power to the Profession. So that's, in theory, one way you could think about this. This is an example of a proposed salary scale that Minnesota has put forth. They have not put this into place, but this is their, you know, they have a nice white paper about it that you all have a link to. And in thinking about what that framework of ECE 1, 2, and 3 could look like in salary scale form. So again, what you have here is a base level that is you might think of it as pre-ECE 1, where someone has a high school diploma, it's entry level, and they're making what, you know, in this example from Minnesota is their, you know, is a minimum wage level. And then you've got a CDA, an associate's in early childhood, a BA in early childhood. So the same thing going up as we saw on the last slide. And the way that, and so you can see here hourly wage and annual wage. One thing I want to note throughout all of this is when we're talking about parity and we're looking at parity with DCPS, that the need for hourly wage when you have one employee that might be working 40 hours a week but not 52 weeks a year, for example, and in another setting, you know, there is, you know, it is 52 weeks a year, so hence these hourly wages that you'll see throughout this. And the way that Minnesota approached this was to set that ECE 1 level at what the Minnesota Council on Inclusion and Equity determines as a family living wage, which is defined here. So they set that there, and then from there they built up from there. That ECE2 is 1.25%, so 25% more than that, and the ECE3 another 25%, with the idea that the ECE3 reaches parity with public school salaries. So that's one way of thinking about this. This slide gives a snapshot, and I think I have the details right. If I don't, the point still stands. That when you look here at DC's credentialing requirements, and you'll see that what I've included in here are the credentialing requirements, some of which have not actually kicked in. So to be clear, but what is the minimum credential required? And the blue ones are you know, currently. The green ones, there's still time for folks to meet that. But so if you look at this, what you'll see is you could have someone in a similar role who right now has a different credential requirement. So you could be a teacher in a child development home, and in the language of the licensing database right now, that would be an expanded, or I'm sorry, a home caregiver, a teacher here, an expanded home caregiver here. But you have people in similar roles who have different credentialing requirements. So again, here's where the interrelationship between role and credential is not totally obvious, right? So you could be a lead teacher and have a different credential and meet the credentialing requirements for DC. So I just note that to just remind us that it's not quite as clear, and that as you look, even going up, to, in some cases, there are different number of credit hours in early childhood that count towards credentialing, et cetera. So as we think about the idea of creating a salary scale, you saw on that last slide, these very neat 3 different lines, the entry level, and then these 3 different lines, and they're associated with one specific degree. Now, I don't know whether that's actually how it plays out in Minnesota or whether they're just making it look very, very, clean on this. If we were to do something like that, then all of a sudden we'd have at least, however many different columns this is, which might be the way to go. But I just want to note that it starts to get a little complicated. And so with that, I want to just take a look at a little summary of how the ECE compensation scale paper approached this. So we just looked at that one approach from Minnesota. What ECE did, again, in the study that they just put out, which, as a reminder, is not, we are not locked into that. It is an input for us as a task force. It's not it's not even a recommendation per se from ECE. It is trying to play out a scenario that allows us to look at what this could look like in DC. So what you see here is these different levels for teacher, and there actually are several levels beyond bachelor's that are not pictured on this slide. The bachelor's level is parity with DCPS entry level salary, which also requires the bachelor's. There's slightly different certification requirements, but there's sort of basic parity there, and that's where that number comes from, that $66,000. So that's the parity that we're talking about. But we also, as we noted, have teachers who have met their credentialing requirements, who are lead teachers, but who have degrees other than a bachelor's. So we have folks in associate level or in CDA level who are meeting credentialing requirements as lead teachers. And so ECE had to figure out, all right, given that we know there is differentiation based on credential, what would that look like? All of these people have the same role, but they have different credentials. So ECE's approach was to look at a teacher. Well, actually, before I do that left-hand side, I'm going to look at this one for one sec. There is one level on the ECE compensation scale for assistant teachers, and you see that one here. The idea there is there is one level for the educational aides in DCPS, which ECE used as the parity. Okay, so there's one level of the DCPS scale. There's one level on this proposed scale here. So that's for what we would say are the assistant teachers in our context. So in figuring out how to think back to the teacher level, think about these 3 different levels. This level here, where you have a teacher with a CDA, so the credential here is similar. In this case, there's a credential for the assistant teacher, and the credential for the teacher is the same, but the role is different. So ECE made a determination that given that here's the parity with DCPS, and then the teacher who has that same credential is set at 25% higher. That's sort of how they approach that. And for the associates, they approached it by looking at this as I can't, underneath my thing here, but as between the minimum living wage at $15.20 per hour and the base salary for a teacher with a BA. So that's how they came up with that. So Minnesota had that 25% increase with each level. This is how ECE approached it. So I want to just lay that all out there to do 2 things. One, to remind us of this same role, different credential, same credential, different role. Both of those things happen and are going to have to be considered in a salary scale. And to just start to put out there, well, look at some of these numbers and what do you think? Like what makes sense? What doesn't make sense? How should we be thinking about this? All right, so what I'm going to do is first, I'm looking in the chat. Oh, okay, so Sally noted another thing to add to what this is not differentiated by. So going back to this, that it's not differentiated by whether a center or home participates in subsidy program or not. So we had talked about that in our earlier meeting. Credentials that have been evaluated. Okay, so, and Christina and Sina has raised a question about whether credentials that have been evaluated by an equivalency agencies approved by universities are recognized. So I'm gonna actually, that question is one that's gonna lead us into this next batch. So this is a litany of questions that are far from the only ones, but to just get the conversation going, at which point I'm going to put myself on mute and listen to a discussion, and you all can then not hear this little puppy barking in the background. So based on all that I've laid out here, here are some of the questions that we're going to need to wrestle with. So one, at which credential increments should we set salary grades? So we could have 25 different salary grades for every, or, you know, that may or may not make sense, but we're going to have to think about that given the credentialing requirements. Do we want to set grades that go beyond the required credential for a role? And if so, how many? So, so again, right now, for example, in the ECE version that they put out, there's just one level right now, one grade for assistant teachers. So that sets their base salary, and then there's steps each year, so their salaries would go up over time. But if they earned a different degree, there's no additional salary line in that particular model for them. Conversely, for the teacher one, it starts at that CDA level, but then it goes well beyond the bachelor's level, and there's a bachelor's plus, and there's a master's, and there's a doctorate. All of those levels are laid out, which all bring with them additional salary scale. So we can still meet, well, so that's one question. How should we think about the differentials between levels? So do we think about sort of a bottom-up approach where we've got, you know, we've got our baseline of minimum wage and we're thinking about going from there? Do we think about how close it makes sense for each level to be to that bachelor's parity, for example? So those are things we'll want to think about. How do we want to, you know, related to that question, how do we want to prioritize different levels on the salary scale? So for example, we could decide that bringing up the floor is really important, and we know we have to reach that parity expectation, but that it's more important to sort of push up the bottom from an equity perspective. That might be something we think about. What are your gut reactions to the numbers that are in ECE's report? I mean, were there any of them that you were like, oh, that's not gonna make sense given what I know, or that feels right? Given that the salary scale is based on this 40-hour work week, oh, it says hat, but it should say what. What are the implications for family childcare, for child development home educators who are small business owners, and in some cases don't have a salary per se? That's not how they, you know, have set up their finances. And so do we need to think about things that way? They aren't thinking in terms of a 40-hour work week per se. How would we address the current 10-year experience waiver that exists in the credentialing requirements? Christina's question around, are there other credentials that, you know, that would apply, you know, is another one that would make sense to sort of add here. So those are just some questions. Those are certainly not all the questions, but I wanted to just get people's creative juices flying. And I'm now going to stop sharing so that folks can see each other. I'm going to try and stop sharing, but there we go. Okay. So what I'd like to do is open the floor to reactions, questions, things that you think we should be thinking about. with the idea that as we did with the eligibility, my sort of goal here as, you know, as a facilitator is to just get as much of what's in people's heads out there on the table. What are going to be the sticky, thorny questions that we know we're going to need to get back to? We're not going to make decisions tonight, but I want us to be able to catalog enough of the issues that we can then do what we've done with the eligibility definition and sort of push some of that to a smaller group to really wrestle with some of the details and then come back to the group. So who has thoughts, reactions, questions?
Just a clarification, I meant foreign credentials. So people who graduated from universities outside the United States. I just forgot to put
Thank you for that clarification, Christina. Very important. Okay. I feel like I just saw something that said there was a raised hand, but I don't see. Oh, Cynthia.
Hello, everyone. I just want to make sure when we talk about grade and level, because in our other meeting, we talked about grade instead of level. So these steps 1 through 12 are grade levels. And are they paired by the years of experience? Because I want to know, see, each one of these go up, and I'm trying to see how, if I'm at a grade teacher level and I have a CDA, the 41 is the entry level of that teacher, or is the entry level for that teacher is a person with a diploma for the CDH perspective? Would it be the 1520 per hour and not the 1979?
So the way I think this works, and Sarah, I'm going to ask you to check me on this. The grade is the level that the given your role and credential, the level that you're starting at. The step is that entry level, and then with each year of experience, you're going up. No, sorry, not with each year of experience.
Yeah, so Abby, that's generally correct. The grades, and I realize it's confusing because in schools we say grades to mean something else, but the grades mean the combination of role and credential in the hypothetical salary schedules that we created for the compensation study. The steps are increases within that role credential combination tied to experience. However, in the DCPS salary schedule, which we're using as a model, a step is not the same thing as a year of experience. There's a whole formula that they have to calculate what step you're at that takes into account your experience and some other like professional development participation and things like that. It does not mean that people get a step increase every year, though. It takes much longer than 12 years to get to steps 12 and 15.
So we do have access to that data of how DCPS is calculating that.
We do. The way DCPS calculates it includes things that are like unique and specific to how DCPS operates. So it wouldn't translate to childcare. Yeah.
But we can use it as a ground level to say how we can pair it over to childcare in general.
We could look at it. Yes.
Like, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Cynthia, and that explanation, Sarah. That does feel very important. So it adds another thing to our list, which is if we're looking at the experience criterion, which is one of the ones we need to be looking at, that thinking about how that progresses over time is not as simple as each year you get. I mean, it could be. We could create one that is as simple as that, but it may not be. Sally.
Well, and the steps may help with the question about grandfathering folks in. Like we have now the 10-year kind of clause in there that they can be grandfathered in, and that, maybe looking at that formula for steps could be a way to see how they fit in the salary scale.
Yeah, I like that. That makes a ton of sense. It creates some flexibility without having to go out of the credential. Other questions, reactions?
I have a question for those who are day-to-day working in this. Would setting up this type of levels and steps have a situation where you would have a lot of staff members who maybe have multiple years or decades of experience but don't have all the training, and this type of system would actually, based on this, bump them down in their salaries? Or are we kind of saying, based on each organization, you can be grandfathered in, and then how do we get around having a fair, equitable system, but then also recognizing the folks who are in centers who have been there for a long time and are trusted and parts of the industry in that way? And I ask just because I don't know, but wonder how implementing something like this would have a great impact on someone who maybe doesn't have the levels of credentialing that the salary matches.
Marla and Sally and Christina, any thoughts on that?
I have thoughts. First, I need clarity. Sarah, and can you give an example of when a year would not equal a step in DCPS? Like, because in my experience, you work a year, you get a step increase every year. So what would be an example where that would not happen?
I don't have an example on hand. My understanding, though, is that DCPS uses like a formula to figure out what step you are that takes into account some things related to years of experience and some things related to PD. We can get that information for people if it's helpful, but I don't have it like off the top of my head right now.
Okay. And the only reason why I ask is because I know in a lot of times when you're coming from one system to another, they have a way of evaluating where you come in on which step. But then from that point, you earn a step per year. Normally, you're not held at a step unless there's an issue, a performance issue that some systems have. If you have a performance issue, they hold you at, you can't progress in a step. So I just wanted to get a sense of that. I think my concern is the more complicated for people to manage. And I don't know how to put that more eloquently than that, but I am concerned about, DCPS has a credentialing office, they have an evaluation office, they can really look at where your experience comes in, where it matches. A lot of times they cap you at a certain amount of years and then you don't have any more step increases. And so I am worried about the burden of all of that for centers and home-based programs too. But again, I don't want to oversimplify that it also impacts people in a negative, adverse way. I do wonder about one of the models, I think, around incentivizing education. One of them, I think in Minnesota, one of the salary scales I saw seemed to, in some ways, disincentivize continuing education. So I just want to make sure that, I know this is not a conversation around quality, but I know that that there is some connections. And so I want to better understand that. And I know that was a lot, but simple is better is my overall feeling for user friendliness.
I think a lot of the centers, especially the homes that I have spoke to, are very concerned about sustainability. And obviously with this level of salaries being, they said to me, I'd rather to have a system where OSCE takes care of it or whatever. But if the money doesn't exist, it's not me, it's like a bonus compensation. And, but I really think that for a lot of them, it's not going to be a business anymore to sustain a home daycare, with some of the salaries that are posted here. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be like that. I think it's about how the money is going to be delivered that will either help them to keep in business or, will put a lot of people out of business. And that's a reality.
I want to flag, so one, I want to play back. So I'm hearing Marla's point around simple is better as a general principle, understanding that like it could be too simple and have problematic consequences. So I appreciate you naming that, but that feels like a principle that I'm seeing a principle in that, the sort of simple is better. So I want to kind of get a sense from folks whether that feels about right. And then on the point that you are making, Christina, one thing that I think is going to continue to come up in our conversation today, although it's not the focus of our conversation today, is the delivery mechanism, because that again matters in terms of some of how we end up setting the salary scale, right? Like that, so for example, like certain delivery systems are going to mean that simplicity is even more important because it's going to require too much of providers. So I just want to name that we're not focusing on the delivery system today, that like disbursement, how funds will be dispersed, but that is going to play a role. And then I see Anne's hand up. I want to just pose back Marla's question. Oh, that was a hand from before. Around the degree to which continuing education is incentivized or not, because I want to get at where people's heads are on that. Because let me just put out like a sort of crude examples to get people thinking. So if you have someone in a role where they've met the baseline credential, and they want to continue their education, if they don't switch roles, then, but they have an additional degree, then they are gonna, they're gonna feel like, well, I've got this addition, I had my CDA, now I have my AA, and I'm still an assistant teacher, but I've earned my AA, and so I should earn more because I'm bringing more to the table. Very logical argument. Taken to its logical conclusion, or illogical conclusion perhaps, someone could stay in a position where the role was such that the salary was lower, but keep earning credentials. Now you might think, well, they should just move into a new role, and maybe that will happen in a lot of cases, right? But do we want built into our system the possibility that someone could have significantly more education than their role requires from a credentialing perspective, and get paid, for that? Or is there an incentive to look, it's time to move into, the next level role? So you've earned that degree, but in order to really kind of cash in on that new degree you have, you're going to need to pursue you're going to pursue a teacher role. So those are just sort of scenarios that I think could play out that I just want to add to the mix. I see. Let's do Marika and then back to Cynthia.
Okay. Along the lines, I just want to point at a structural gap. And that structural gap is we don't have an entity right now licensing early childhood educators, which adds to some of the complexity. It doesn't necessarily halt the work, but I think it's important to point to that structural gap. In the early childhood childcare space, OSCE license the facility and not the individuals in this facility. Public DCPS has the benefit of having a licensing entity in place to help with sort of the licensure. And so the scenario you just give with an individual in a role with a higher credential, having a higher credential doesn't automatically qualify you for that position. And I just think that the structural gap of not having an entity in place to actually license the individual could make this work a bit more complicated.
Thanks, Marika. Cynthia and then Christina.
Marika took piece of my response, but that's what I was also thinking about, because DCPS is regulated a little bit differently, and they have certain freedoms that does not cross over to a licensed provider or facility. Also, too, as far as that salary piece, teachers in DCPS may not be getting that bump and still have to apply for a job when it becomes available. If we're just throwing around salaries and money all over the place, we have to have some consistency as far as if a position is available for you to take, then teachers can still have that access to go to another school or go to another place. We still want to sustain the staff, but at the same time, if you're acquiring these things, people still going to move and decide if they want to be a lead teacher or not. You know, that's going to be their choice. But I think I don't want us to get boggled into a point of a person not being able to apply for a new job if it's available. You know, that should be the norm. That's what we're already doing already. But can we still have that as an access? If it's available for you, you can take that and bump up. But if it's not available, then we're just going to give you the salary because you're doing the degree part. I don't know how businesses will be able to sustain themselves if that is a way that just happens overnight. Like, I'm just thinking.
So Cynthia, let me play back what I think I'm hearing. And then if I'm right, I want to ask you a further question. So, so from your perspective, there's potentially a challenge from a sort of financial business model of if someone earns a degree that is beyond what they're required, the credentialing requirement for their role, that having that pressure, and I'll just say, I mean, in your situation as a family childcare provider, although the same might be the case in centers, that having that pressure of adding to that person's salary without them moving into a new role feels concerning to you.
Not necessarily. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Is that right?
Not necessarily concerning. I'm just saying, as far as a business standpoint, if I was phased in, I would come in as a person with a master's degree. I'm not sure if I want to do a PhD or not, but that's still my option to do so. If my job is yielding that responsibility of having that space for me to grow, then I'll do that. For another provider, if it's a family childcare teacher and she has a space for a lead teacher and an assistant teacher, and that other assistant teacher decides to go get a degree, if that money is available or that position is available, then you can have that. What's going to happen is that if a person decides to go and get the degree, they're going to have to still stay in that position for a minute, because if that job is not there where they're working, or they're going to end up applying for a new job at another facility so they can get that level of growth. I'm just saying that I know it's not going to be reasonable for that position or any center or any place to be able to say, okay, now you got the degree. There's plenty of jobs out there. You got your degree. Your job said, get your degree and you'll move instantly. And it took a year or so for them to do that, because the position was not available for them.
Yeah. So, so I think this is a tricky question. And again, I do think that trying to, like if we're, we want to incentivize people, we want to incentivize career ladders, right? And opportunities for people to grow and move into new roles, and be properly compensated for those new roles. And I do think asking ourselves how we want to prioritize these dollars. At some point, this is a fixed pot, right? Like we can advocate for more funding, and hopefully there'll be opportunities over time, et cetera. But I do think as a task force, it's responsible for us to think about what we prioritize. And one way to think about that, and maybe this doesn't play out that often, so it doesn't matter. Maybe my hypothetical is not like a real situation, but I do think that one thing we might ask ourselves is how far above the required credential do we want to guarantee additional grades of salary as part of the pay scale, to the point that we were just talking about. So let me go to Kelly next, and then Christina, and then Marika.
I don't know if this helps, but I can say that I was in that situation. So this is what my job did. I went back to school and acquired my AA, and there were no lead teacher positions. And so what we did have was just a little incentive for each. Say you got your CDA, I'm just throwing out numbers. You got $1, you got your AA, maybe you got $3 more, but we know $3 more or $1.50 more in getting a degree, number one, doesn't even begin to pay for your degree that you receive, but it is still an incentive that you went and continue to further your education and to continue to gain more knowledge. And it took about 2.5 to 3 years before I was able to apply and get a lead teacher's position. But at the same time, the teachers, I would think we are moving to position ourselves for that. Because I could have, of course, left, but it was where I wanted to be. So the incentive I felt like was okay, and the respect level in my community of work colleagues kept me there. So even if they didn't meet a lead teacher salary because they got lead teacher credentials, it's just maybe a point of giving everybody who gains a credential a small increment. I don't know if I just complicated it, but I'm just.
No, I think that's super helpful, Kelly, because I think what that's saying to me is like, there may be, there's a potentially a happy medium, where there's some, you get some financial recognition that you've done this next thing, but it's not gonna break the bank, as it were. So it's an incentive, and frankly, it sounds like, Kelly, it might be an incentive to stick around in your facility, until that role opens up. All right, so we've got Christina and then Marika, and then there's a question in the chat from Rakaya that I want to flag for you, Sarah, because you're probably the best to answer that one.
I was just going to say that I think what we're facing right now is shortage. So I don't think anybody will have any problem finding a job if they get an advanced degree. And I think that, I think we should treat it like any other profession. The more responsibility, the more, I would like to be an assistant teacher with the salary that I have right now. I mean, I think that I want to make sure people, I'd rather spend money in professional development, give them what they need to do the work, quality work, take the responsibility, get paid. I think that we're going into different place when we're trying to give money when the people are not having more responsibilities. That's just my thought.
Marika.
Yeah, I think my thought was similar to hers, that I think what we're deciding here is the minimum qualifications per role and minimum salary per role. It's the degree, the compensation is tied to the role, not the degree level. I know this sounds kind of circular. And also just emphasizing sort of the minimum qualifications part. So I think we're sort of for some reason we're disconnecting the role, the job function from the degree.
Yeah. So to be clear there, so I think that, again, the role and credential, recognizing that in some cases there's the same minimum credential for a different role, just given our licensing requirements. So I think you're making the important part, again, we're differentiating based on role and credential, but those two things interact. So you can't just look at one or just look at the other in our context. That said, what I'm hearing, I'm hearing what sounds like well, I'm not sure if it's a pattern yet. So what I'm hearing from you, Marika, that I think you're echoing what at least a couple other folks have said, is that what we should be focused on is looking at that role credential combination. What is the minimum salary that meets this new scale? And that should be our focus, not building a grades that go all the way up. Am I getting what you're saying?
Yes, and maybe there should be other opportunities for us to incentivize career degree attainment and others. But I feel like we can focus on incentivizing that right now if we haven't established the minimum qualifications per role and a salary.
Yeah. Okay. So again, like just reminding us that we're part of our job here is to prioritize, right? So we, given that the money's not going to be able to do everything. So what is most important in terms of status? Yeah. Sarah, can you respond to Rakaya's question in the chat about how ECE approached?
Yeah, so just to be clear, there is no science of how to do this kind of work. So what we did was and one of the complexities in this is that DCPS, as Abby was saying, has different credential requirements for the teacher and assistant teacher roles, although the assistant teacher requirements, I would argue, are fairly similar when you take into account the range of options in DCPS for getting that. So the way we calculated the teacher was basically, we just said that it was at the midpoint between the minimum wage and the base salary for a teacher with a bachelor's degree, because an associate's degree involves half as many credit hours. Like, again, that is an assumption. You could have a different set of assumptions. We needed to create some assumption to put something out there that people could look at and react to. And then for the CDA, operating on the assumption that a teacher with a CDA, which currently is still permitted by our licensing rules, should make more than an assistant teacher with a CDA because it's a different role, but would be paid less than a teacher with an associate's degree because the teacher with the associate's degree has earned the required credential. And that 25% increase over the base that was set for the assistant teachers basically sort of came out fairly in between those two levels. Basically, one of the things that I do think is important to think about in this, that we were trying to think about in the compensation schedules, is like, what do we think an appropriate increment between these different role credential combinations at the starting point is. Right now, the data we looked at for the cost modeling, which again has limitations, suggests that the differentials between the roles are often not very big in terms of the increased compensation that people make, relative to other things.
Does that answer your question, Rakaya, what you were trying to?
Thank you. Yeah, I know that just decisions have to be made when you're putting something like this together, and just was trying to understand the basics.
Okay, I see Marika and Marla, or no, okay, I see Marla and Rakaya's hands up, I think. So let's go to Marla and then back to Rakaya.
Legislatively, what's our charge? Do we have to do a salary scale, or can we do salary minimums at different levels? So, because Marika was arguing, I think makes a lot of sense, unless our charge is that we have to create a scale, which means steps, and then you get into experience, and then you get into a whole bunch of different things to make it much more complicated. If we're just doing minimum, so for instance, if you're a lead teacher with a CDA versus a AA versus a BA versus a MA versus whatever, then, and with the minimums will be placed at each one of those. So I'm just really want to understand that. Second of all, I know we are not supposed to be talking about how it will be delivered, but I have heard some discussion around almost like a bonus that people might get the differential from ECE or some other place. And I'm really concerned about how that's going to impact staff in terms of tax, because initially you'll be withheld at a bonus level. It equals out at one point, but when you get it, it's going to possibly be at a bonus level, which means you'll see less dollars in your pocket until you actually do your tax income. And so I just want to, I know we're not supposed to be thinking about that, but I'm concerned about it, because if the point is to get dollars in people's pockets, then we don't want to do something that works against that.
Yeah, so I appreciate you noting that, Marla, and it is squarely on the list of things that we'll need to think about in terms of the disbursement mechanism. And you know, in the category of the sort of unintended consequences or the risks, depending upon which approach we take. So duly noted, and we'll put that on the list for the next discussion. I've put back up on the screen, per your first question, around what our charge is. Again, like the core piece of this is a salary scale that shows parity with DCPS and that accounts for role, credentials, and experience. And the language in the pay equity fund actually focuses on a salary scale to increase the minimum compensation. So suggests that, you know, that's sort of setting that minimum. A salary scale that is like as close to parity as possible with DCPS would lay out those levels. But again, it can't be exactly parity to DCPS because the context is different. So I think that I would say there's some room for interpretation as to what the salary scale, like what all the elements of the salary scale need to look like in terms of, you know, comparing to a DCPS salary scale, provided that there is some way to account for those three things: role, credential, and experience. With, you know, I hear you, the experience one in some ways being even more complicated than the others, because even sort of assessing that. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if others have thoughts based on Marla's point as to where that leaves us. Rakaya and then Cynthia.
Yeah, I was going to call back to this charge. I think was one of the things that I wanted to highlight was that we are being tasked with a compensation scale that includes all of those things. I think that it would be, I understand that implementation-wise, it's challenging to think about putting together something this complicated and figuring out how to get the funds out. And also, I think that we know that early learning programs, I think asking early learning programs to figure out their own grades and things like that will create a lot of kind of lopsidedness across the industry. And so I think there's a way, that we could try and bridge the differences. I mean, if folks, I'm not sure kind of what I'm hearing, but it sounds like there's, if folks don't want to do a really detailed compensation scale, which I still feel some version of would be kind of my ideal in terms of making sure that we're really creating this strong workforce pipeline, making sure that we're really promoting quality in our system. But if we want to take some sort of compromise, I think at least creating in the structure of the program and talking about in the structure of the program, some sort of discretionary funds for folks to provide their own, incentives for increased education or experience or things like that. And I know we're not talking about the program structure, but I'm just, I think, more noting that I think that it's important for us to create space with these funds for those things to be rewarded and incentivized. And whether it's in an explicit salary scale, which I think promotes equity, or if it's in kind of opportunities with flexible funds or discretionary funds beyond to help providers beyond the minimum requirements that we're discussing. I think something in those ranges of things, like thinking about something to account for those variations is important, at least from my perspective.
Yeah. And again, as we've talked about with other issues, that there's also a question of, priority and sequencing. So, in the same way that we've talked about prioritizing folks who are in the classroom in these particular roles, and that's the focus of this effort, we know that there are going to be other needs that, that we can name. And here too, if the priority, as stated in the pay equity fund legislation, is focused on making sure that minimum salaries reflect these, roles and credentials and are increased. And that's the priority and the focus and the starting point. And there, there may be an ideal world that goes well beyond that and has a much more blown out and complicated salary scale. So yeah, so I think it's helpful to hear from people like what is most important, because it does matter. Like we're going to have to sequence things in some way, and so it's helpful to know where we start. Cynthia.
Okay, I think what is most important that I would like to see is that we get the equity piece across the board and making sure our and those variations are there, like Rakaya stated before. Also, I wanted to know that do we have anywhere that we're seeing, I see a lot of numbers, but where is these definitions of what an actual DCPS teacher does, so we can see how that parity will go over, because it's no way that we can make it an equal parity, because infant and toddlers are taught a different way than 2 and then 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, as the child get older, the way that we're teaching is a little bit different, but it doesn't mean that we can't still pair it in a way and look at those definitions of what a DCPS teacher does and how we can equate that to what we actually do in our programs. Do we have anything that's like that we can look at those definitions, not during this meeting, but offline, when we can really get to an understanding of how we can create that parity across the board and create those minimums?
Yeah, that's certainly, that we can certainly bring in information. And Marika had a question in the chat that similarly was looking at, making sure we fully understand the DCPS scale that we are theoretically creating parity with. So we can certainly pull in some of that information. I would love to.
Oh, wait, I have my hand.
Sorry, yeah, go Kathy.
Yeah, so I had a question about if we are charged with creating a salary scale that's in parity with DC Public School, how can we not consider grade, credentials, education level, and years of experience? Because if we don't, then that wouldn't be parity.
Yep. So again, to be clear, like role and credential and experience are all things that we are charged specifically with considering. So role would be similar to the grade. No, it's not similar to the grade.
I would think it would
similar
be education.
To the, well, sorry, the grade is similar. The grade is the education.
Education, right.
Yes.
That's what I understand.
That's credential. Grade is the credential.
Correct.
And then role is that, so for DCPS, there's a role of like ET15 is
Correct.
a teacher, right? So that's our like teacher on our end, or our lead educator is the same as that ET15. So that is the comparison there. Credential, you have the different levels, and DCPS starts at bachelor's. Again, ours would start in a different place because of the different requirements. So I think that there's no disagreement that has to be a part of it. In what we're doing. I think the question is how many grades do you have? So we're not going to have the same ones as DCPS again, because our credentialing requirements are different. So does it make sense for us to have the BA and the BA plus and the masters and the masters plus and the PhD? Maybe it does. Or maybe parity is, well, because we're starting in a different place. It's the same number of levels, that maybe that's parity, but it's not the same credentialing levels. Like those are open questions. So perfect parity is not going to be possible because there just are differences between the two systems. but the basic role credential experience, I think we have to speak to.
So the parity interpretation comes in, so that I understand, at the AA level and the CDA level. Is that what you're suggesting?
No, I mean, I'm suggesting that like, so what we were charged with doing is parity with DCPS based on credential and role. So the idea being that if you have a BA in a teacher role, like of course, I mean, as you all know, like where this sort of comes from at its core is if you have a BA as a pre-K teacher right now in a center and you're not involved in PKEEP, you are making a different salary than having a BA as a pre-K teacher in DCPS, right? So the idea is that should just be parity. If you have a BA and you're teaching, and if you're teaching infants, toddlers, because we're not differentiating based on age, that BA is parity of that BA. The problem is that because in DCPS, you can't do that job if you have less than a BA, but you can do that job if you have less than a BA in those other environments. That's where parity just becomes like, we've got to decide what that is because it's not evident.
Right.
Does that?
No, I totally get it.
So before I see Sally and Cynthia, do people need a few-minute break to, yeah, okay. I just realized it's already 17. So let's take a 5-minute break, just stretch break, do what you need to do, and we'll start back at 7:20 or 7:22.
Oh, I needed a break.
All right, folks. Thanks for hanging in there for a long first half. Okay, so I've got Sally and Cynthia, and then I want to pose back another question to get some additional feedback from folks.
So I agree, with it would be helpful to hear about the steps and what, the explanation of what those are. But I think we also have to, again, go back to that might not and probably won't translate into the 0 to 5 realm. It's just like if you go into an infant toddler classroom, that's going to look totally different than a pre-K classroom, but that doesn't mean that what those infant and toddler teachers do is any less. Like my expectations for my infant and toddler teachers are exactly the same for my preschool teachers. There's no difference. The expectation is the same, and they get paid at their level of experience, their credential, and their role. So my infant and toddler teachers have BAs. And so I think that's how I think we can't just say we're going to have a minimum at each level and that's it, because I think we sell ourselves short. I don't think that sort of fits in our charge, and also kind of, this underlying and long-term building a profession. This is where we're trying to build a 0 to 5 profession, career ladder, the future leaders. I mean, DCPS is a CDA program. So what better incentive for those young high school graduates to enter an early ed program at the CDA level as an assistant teacher and know that they can ultimately earn this type of money if they go on and, get their AA or their BA. So I think we have to think about that and think about how DCPS salary scale translates into the 0 to 5 realm, which, again, how we get parity, but parity, I don't think it's going to be as black and white as the definition of parity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Sally. Cynthia.
That goes on to what I was saying about what Sally was saying. If we had those definitions, we are creating that narrative for infant and toddlers. It will not look the same. So if that's our charge, I would rather be focused on what that charge is so we can get something out that people will like and agree with.
Yeah. And I see your question in the chat, Cynthia. Are we looking current funding only, or also thinking about future funding, which I think is an important question. And again, I would just come back to sort of pushing ourselves to think about, there's an initial pot of money that we know exists, and that we can plan to in the immediate term, and with a guess that pot of money is not going to do everything that we could possibly want, although, maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's probably a pretty good guess, that it's going to be important for us to not only say these are all the things we want, but this is what we think is most important. So when we think about this salary scale, we might have a vision down the line of being able to pay for every level of education, regardless of role, et cetera, because we think that is really important as part of this profession, and that's not going to be something achievable initially with these dollars. And so to set a salary scale that requires people to meet that across all of those levels might be problematic in the short term, given the amount of funding that we have. So those are the tensions that I just want us to keep remembering, because ultimately we want to be able to pass over something that feels actually, feasible in the current reality, which doesn't mean we can't speak to the future reality, and name the things, direction we think we should go. Marika.
Yeah, I think on the issue of scale and giving the limitations of what we have, the decisions we have to recommend right now, I'm wondering if we can also leave some of this up to the market. That if we're supporting centers in a very meaningful way, incentivizing the acquisition of additional degrees, incentivizing experience, one may assume that they could have enough money, public funding to sort of support that. And that just has me thinking about how DCPS and DC Charter School incentivize educators in the same way, because to some degree, I don't know if DC public charter schools, for example, are beholden to the scale system of DCPS, yet and still they're able to sort of, I would say, coexist. I don't know the tensions there, but there's still, the minimum of a charter school still seems sufficient enough to have some educators selecting to work in charter schools with or without the salary scale of DCPS. And I'm wondering if there's some lessons we can pull from that.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And that's more my wheelhouse. So I want to come back to, just for a couple minutes, I want to come back to this slide. I know this slide has a lot on it. There's a lot going on here. But I want to just focus, this just has steps 1 through 5, just sort of for purpose of room. But I want to get a gut from people when you look at these actual numbers. And again, this is a hypothetical, as we keep saying. So there's nothing other than the BA level, which is sort of the fixed one, to at least some large degree. The rest of these this is just one way of doing this. But what's your gut when you look at these and think, all right, like, given your experience, do these numbers feel like, oh yeah, this feels like a starting salary that feels right given the credential level and the role? So everything on the left here is teacher, and then this is the assistant teacher. I just would love to get just some gut from people of whether they're like, whoa, this is way off, this is not going to work, just reactions.
I think it's different for centers that the homes, because of, for infants, it's only 6 children. If you have a home for 6 infants, it might be harder for you to do higher salaries, but they're not, in my opinion, they're not outrageous.
I think that may be a myth because it's not harder for homes to pay that salary. It is now because the pay equity is not there. If we're getting paid equal to centers, we would be able to afford our staff, no matter what the size. And so when that pay equity comes in, if that teacher has an AA, we can afford that. If that teacher has the BA, we can afford that.
I'm now on a screen where I can't see raised hands, so can people just speak up?
I'll speak up. So this is just a point of clarification. I can't remember who just spoke, but I think is what you're saying basically that it's less about, it's not so much about looking at who you currently have on staff, because that's not, who you have on staff is a reflection of who you can retain based on pay, right? So in the absence of pay equity or higher salaries that you could offer, that's why you have, that's why your staff composition is what it is. Was that the point that you were making?
I think it was me, Cynthia.
Yeah.
Is that my
yes,
voice?
yes,
Yes.
your
The
voice.
reason. Yeah. Sorry for stepping in. I didn't mean to, but I just wanted to address.
No.
Yes, that's what I was saying. The reason why we can't afford, because we're usually the last resort, and that should not be the case. If we're allowed those resources and we're allowed the pay that we need, which is equity across the board, whether it's subsidy or whatever it is, we will be able to afford those opportunities to others just as well as centers, DCPS, DC charter schools, or whomever.
Got it. Okay.
And I think that's because of the rate of subsidy for homes is lower than the centers or in charter schools. It's not even competitive, right, Cynthia?
Yes, it's because of that. That when you saying you're asking for quality, but you're paying and taking a foundation of extra funds from a program, there's no way we can ever get there. But if we're starting at that level playing field and saying, no matter if you're a home, no matter as long as you're taking care of our children, this is what we're going to provide for a teacher that has credentials to care for these children. So that means that we're in a playing field to hire quality staff, as everybody says, that has the credentials that they need and be able to sustain them to run our businesses.
I see Marika, Sarah, and Michael.
I'm still processing my question. I'll pass.
All right, Sarah.
Sure. I just thought a couple pieces of context might be helpful for folks. The teacher assistant scale that is presented in the compensation study is actually lower than many of the teacher assistant salary assumptions that OSSI uses in its cost estimation model, which informs subsidy payment rates. We corrected for that and did not, when we costed out what it would cost to implement, we used the teacher assistant assumptions that were already in our model. We didn't lower them in estimating the estimated cost. And when we did the estimation of what it would cost to increase, to cover the cost solely for subsidy kids, we used step 5 in the salary schedule to get to that $58.3 million. We didn't use step 1 and we didn't use step 12. So I just wanted to give people that context as you're thinking about some of these questions.
I just wanted to get my head around like what I should be thinking of these steps as. Like, are we envisioning a system where OSSI is keeping track of this in some kind of way so that these are somehow portable between centers? Or is this kind of like, this is your expected increase at a center? And I guess like a lot of where my head's going with this is, you know, we are not an island. We have various states on either side of us. And I feel like it would be really good to hear from some of the providers if any of these numbers seem like ones where they feel like that's going to put them at a place where DCPS is going to poach their people, or their people are going to take jobs over the border in a different state. But by the same token, I think if there's a way to use, you know, our credentialing ability or record keeping through OSSI that like allows us to be competitive with other states that aren't prioritizing this as much, I think that's probably, you know, a significant value that we can bring to all the centers in DC.
I think it's a good question as to who over time who tracks this, and I mean who assesses that the step initially, and is that tracked centrally in some way over time. I think it's an open question, and the kind of thing we'd have to talk about in terms of what systems are in place and what systems might need to be built in order to do something like that. All right, Marika, Marla, and Cynthia.
Yeah, just some reactions to the slide that was on the screen. The difference between the teacher assistant with a CDA and a teacher with a CDA seems quite narrow. Again, if going back to the notion that this is about roles. And I'm looking particularly at the first step.
And I would add to that, Marika, just to sort of layer in what Sarah just shared, which is that level for the teacher assistant is already on the low side compared to what the, even their cost of care model assumes. So that would make it an even, like if you adjusted that up, then it'd be even narrower difference between that and the teacher role.
I'm sorry, we should know that if you adjust which one up.
Sorry, the assistant. So if this number for the assistant, it sounds like from what Sarah's saying is that might actually be too low of an assumption based on other information that they have. So let's just assume that for a second. So if this number went up, the step one went up for a teacher assistant, then there's even less room between that and the teacher. It exacerbates the problem that you're identifying.
Sure, I agree. And the same can be said for the teacher with the CDA and the teacher with the AA. In some ways, it sort of disincentivizes the teacher with the AA if the role will be the same, the responsibilities will be the same. And the difference is about $2 per hour-ish. And I think it makes it seem as if the CDA is sort of a midpoint. The 48 credit hours seems a little bit high to me as the sort of equivalence.
The 48 hours is just a category that we track in our system. That's why it's there. We're not saying that. Yeah.
Okay. So I know that, for example, some universities will give you 9 credit hours at most for your CDA. And so essentially it's, and some associate's degree programs have as much as 120 hours sometimes. I just want us to just play with that a little bit. And then I think the assumptions about the credit hours in addition to the role will help us better understand the differences we need to put in place between a step one with a step one teacher with a CDA versus a teacher with an associate's degree. Just so that we don't end up with a scenario where we're in actuality incentivizing a teacher to have a CDA and disincentivizing a teacher from having an AA. No answers now, I just want to point that out for further exploration.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think looking at what those differentials are is going to be really important. Marla.
Can you put that back up? Because there's just no way I can remember. I do know, I noticed that it seems like there is a incentivizing of longevity. So for instance, the percent increase from step to step increases more toward steps 3 to 5. So is that purposeful that we want to incentivize longevity? And
what would you say to that? So this, again, this is parity with what DCPS does. So that's how they figured out those percentages. That's where it comes from. And I'm curious as to what you think, Marla, and what others think. Like what makes sense?
I mean, I think incentivizing longevity is a good business decision because you put a lot of effort, professional development, resources into supporting a teacher, and you want them to stay. So conceptually, it makes sense, but we haven't talked about it, so I just wanted to point it out that it looks like that is being incentivized. I'm still trying to. Something about the CDA scale just seems off to me and I can't articulate it yet.
On the teacher side?
Yes. But Sarah, what were you saying about the 48 credit hours? And what was your comment about that? Because
yes, there's a category we track in our system for people who have 48 credit hours, of which at least 15 are in early childhood education. There, I think, are some roles where you can use that as an alternative to a CDA to qualify for the role in our system. We're not saying that they are equivalent, though.
Oh, okay. So it's a or, not an and.
Yes, yeah, those,
Okay.
we're not saying those are where those slashes are, right? And then you see it in the associate degree in ECE. If you have an associate degree, but you don't have a major in early childhood, you can meet that requirement for some roles by having 24 credit hours, even if you don't have a major. That's why that slash is there, and it's saying that. Sorry if that was confusing, and that's similarly an option at the bachelor's degree level as well for some roles.
Okay.
And Sally has pointed out in the chat that that with the December 2023 credential requirements, that CDA teacher level will theoretically go away at that point. I realize that it's not that simple, but I just wanted to highlight that comment.
It will theoretically go away, except for, will the waiver still be there? So I mean, like, I'm trying to know.
Open question.
In theory versus reality, what is the landscape really going to look like? I think that's important in terms as we build out this scale, because it's going to have a bottom line effect on center. So that's why. Yep.
Cynthia, did you have another comment?
Yes. When I looked at the chart, can we put the chart back up a little bit? Because as a professor, just as well, the CDA is equivalent to only 2 CEUs, meaning 2 classes. Or sometimes, depending on the school that you go to, it may only be 3 credit university hours, CEUs. So it's only 3 hours, which is what, 90, about 180 hours or so, like that. But the CDA would still be viable for a home teacher, home-based educator. It may be wiggled out because they're doing away with it, but some of us will still be able to acquire that. So hopefully we're not going to do away with that piece. And then also a person with a BA degree, not in children, is not equivalent to a teacher with a BA degree in early childhood education. Because if you have it in science, that's not teaching about young children.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. All right, so on a couple of questions that are in the chat. So one, in terms of some of the specifics of these levels and the language, like some of this is messy just because there's been, there are different ways of getting to the the credential levels. There's just it's not super clean. So some of this we can sort of add a little color to. I wanted to respond to Marika's question. Sorry, the dog again. Right now, so the living wage and minimum wage are the same number in DC law at the moment. So I don't know if that always will be the case, but it is the same right now. Okay. What I want to do, so Rakaya, were you asking for people to weigh in on that question right now? Is that what your question in the chat?
Maybe or maybe not. I think more it seems like we're all like, from that conversation we had about a scale, it seems like everyone felt like it was important for us to establish a really strong, thoughtful minimum as a top priority. And maybe I feel like this is it's overwhelming to look at a scale with this many numbers and this many parts, and maybe starting with what is a strong, thoughtful minimum could be kind of a good foundation and starter point. And then we can build out from there. And so it doesn't have to be at this exact moment, but if that's what we're talking about today, then that maybe is a way to just focus the conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and I do think, again, starting with that priority makes a lot of sense. Sally, I want to note that the question that you ask is that information is actually in that the OSCE workforce data overview that we looked at last time. You've got that link again.
Yeah, and I think, but that my point was that maybe we need to also look at that data and then have these then expand on these conversations. And I was actually trying to find that document, Sarah. I couldn't pull it up right away, but
in the links that I sent tonight, it's in there. So look in your email and click right to it.
But yeah, I think if we kind of look at that data too, that can help inform maybe some of the questions we may have, or it may answer some of our questions, or it may add questions. But I think, looking at that data is also very important.
Yep, I totally appreciate that. And I think it allows us to start to apply, what would some of these things actually look like in the real world, and which of these questions are kind of moot versus which of them actually really matter because of our current context. So I think that's exactly right. I want to spend the last few minutes actually talking about some next steps, including what our sort of avenues are for chasing down some of these kinds of questions. So first of all, appreciate all of those inputs that people have. I think that this was very useful in elevating where the particular challenges are going to be, what feels sort of most worrisome to folks, and what we want to prioritize. I think we got some sense of some of those things, and I wouldn't say we're at 100% consensus, but it feels like there's some patterns that are emerging. So we'll take all of this and try and organize it into, all right, where do we think we landed in terms of things where there's some general agreement? Where do we think the biggest open questions are? And then be able to sort of tackle it that way. And looking at the real life data, as Sally just suggested. So thank you all for all that. In terms of some next steps, I'm going to share my screen one more time. My niece just arrived home, so she's taking care of the dog, so you won't hear the barking, hopefully. Okay. A couple of next steps. So first of all, as you all know, so actually it's not on here. Thank you all for diving into those insanely detailed follow-up emails that we've been sending with a cajillion links for things. I know at least one of you, it was going into spam. So if you don't get a crazy long detailed email from me, let me know, because it's probably gone into your spam folder. We have, in the next few days, we have small groups of folks on the task force engaged in these informational meetings around the shared services business association. I don't know if I got that acronym exactly right. Subsidy, Quinn, and PKEEP, because we agreed that it would make sense to have a better understanding of what some of the existing mechanisms are that OSCE uses to get dollars out in various ways, not because we're picking one of them, but because it is instructive to us to be able to look at, here are some of the ways that we currently do things, what can we learn from them as we start to think about the mechanisms. The working group on eligibility had a really productive meeting today. I'd say, I don't know, it feels like we're 90% of the way there. I don't know whether people in the group would agree with that. But we are going to be meeting again to sort of try and nail down that eligibility definition and bring it back to the task force. I, in the same way, think we want to do actually probably 2 additional of those working groups. One, to continue some of the salary conversation, get into some of the details and nitty gritty, to be able to then again come back to the task force, having sorted out some of the remaining questions, so that we can come to a proposal. And then the same thing for the mechanism for how we disperse dollars. I know we've been talking about that in fits and starts over our meetings, but want to do that, want to get into some detail there. So I will send out email to that effect with all of these different opportunities. Please let me know then which ones you're interested in. Thank you to all of those of you who've already jumped in on some of these working groups. we definitely need everybody's brains at the table, and so I hope that people will volunteer for some of these moving forward. Task force meeting dates are there, including one which we have added, as you all saw in one of those long emails. Just given all that we have going on, we've added a meeting December 9th. So we're going to have 3 in quick succession, a week apart, and some of those working groups in between. So it's a lot, but I appreciate people hanging in there and giving up their time, because we really want to get this right. As I mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, Chairman Mendelson has offered the opportunity to hold a hearing for the public to be able to share things that people think we ought to be particularly thinking about, things they're worried about. There are, a bunch of people who've been watching each of our meetings, and so I'm sure have specific ideas about ways that we could address some of the things that we're wrestling with, concerns people have, questions people have. So it basically would be helpful in informing our work, and gives us, again, I know that all of you have various constituencies whose voices you're bringing to the table, but it gives us a chance to hear more directly from people. So wanted to get people's sense on, does that feel like something that that would be useful to us? I know that, I don't expect that all of us could necessarily attend, but I certainly would commit to, and I would hope that we could have at least, a representative group of task force members hearing directly, and then we can report back to the full task force the kinds of things that people are sharing. So how do people feel about that as an opportunity? Does that sound like a good idea? Something that we want to ask him to do?
Abby, just as clarification, is the idea that that would replace the meeting that we currently have scheduled for the 15th?
Yeah.
Those things would happen at different times on the 15th.
Yeah, it would be in addition. Okay. That's a good question.
The hearing would probably be earlier in the day, more than likely.
And we have the sign up. I tried to sign up again for the different committees, but I couldn't do it, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But it said that it was closed.
Yeah, so some of them, or I don't know when you went on, but we may have already. But Christina, if you, so you know what, can you shoot me an email, because there are 2 meetings that are happening over the next couple of days on PKEEP, Quinn, subsidy, and SSBA. If you have not yet signed up for that but are interested, just email me and I will get you the info. Okay. Yeah. So anyone who's interested in those, please just let me know.
Pre-keep was today, but I don't know if they're going to meet again. I'm interested in that one. Wasn't it today? The pre-keep
no, it's actually, I can't remember which is which. Sarah, do you remember?
It's Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The Shared Service Business Alliance is tomorrow. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So yeah, definitely let me know if you are okay. I see Cynthia. Yes. Okay. So Cynthia and Christina, I will send you all that info. And if anyone else is interested, please shoot me an email. And then I'll send out a new set of requests for a working group for the mechanism, the disbursement mechanism, and for the salary scale. And I think we'll continue to do what we've been doing in sort of putting out these issues to the whole task force and trying to generate, kind of general direction, things that feel important to people, the questions, all of that, and then move them into these smaller groups where we can make a little bit quicker progress on some of the details and then bring them back. So if people have, thoughts about that approach that we've been taking, I welcome them. And I know I've been sort of a little heavy-handed in pushing the conversations because I just I'm feeling pressed for time. But please don't hesitate to give me feedback just on sort of the process we're taking, and if you feel like we're off course. Rakaya.
Trying to remember what my question was. Oh, is there a way for members of the public to listen in on the smaller learning and working meetings?
Maybe. I say that just because they're literally, I put them on my Zoom account and I don't know how to do that. Here's what I'm going to say. I'm not going to promise that right now because I don't want to promise and then not be able to deliver. What I can definitely promise is that we will share the materials from those meetings. We'll make sure that those are in the files that everyone can have access to, and the summary of the meetings. So I can promise that, but I will see if we can figure out a way to have people participate more directly.
Okay, are you able to share that back with us once you figure it out?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks. Cool.
Any other, so in terms of the hearing that the chairman would host to give us that opportunity to inform our work, does that feel like something that feels worthwhile to people? Yes, no, maybe.
I just want to make sure I understand what the hearing would be. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was captured.
Sure. So oh, go ahead, Marla.
No. Just explain it one more time.
Yes, it would be inviting interested members of the public, whoever that might be. So it could be people who've been following closely our workings, but it could also be people who just know that the work's happening in some way and want to provide input, feedback, either feedback on something we've been talking about or just general input on what they think we should be thinking about. So it would just give us a chance to hear more directly from more folks. Again, I know you all have your networks and have been hearing from folks and are working to bring those voices to the table, but it would be that opportunity.
And who all would be at the hearing? That's what I wanted to, I know who would speak at the hearing, but who would also, would it be council members or would it just be us, or who all would be listening to the comments? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. Christina Setlow, do you want to speak to the council side of it?
Yeah, so from the council side of it, it would be a full on, we would notice it as probably a roundtable because we can't, the rules, we can't notice it as a hearing, but it's the same thing. We would notice it as a roundtable. So any of the council members who wanted to attend could attend. The chairman would be chairing it. We would at minimum be putting it on the website, depending on the day. It could possibly be on all the different channels. But really what it is it would be a council committee of the whole hearing. So it would give an opportunity if council members wanted to come as well to ask questions of the public, they could have.
And it's our role to listen to the questions. We're not responding. There's no expectation for us to respond, correct? We're just listening and taking.
That's right. It's just an opportunity for us to hear kind of what concerns, thoughts people have to help inform our own work. And again, I would not, I wouldn't expect that every member of the task force would come. Certainly everyone could, would be invited to listen firsthand, but we would also provide the, summaries of the input to everyone to be able to, who wasn't able to attend.
I think more opportunities for public engagement are always good. And also, I know this is just the challenge with this task force generally. The date is what kind of is giving me the question mark, is just that I feel like there's a lot of people who will be gone by that point. But that's not to say that we shouldn't go forward with it.
Gone for
end of year vacations and
December 15th. Wow, I want that life. Yeah, I hear that. So does anyone have objection to or concern about such a hearing or roundtable? I mean, I'll just share that, you know, as a general prospect, I land with Rakaya, and just, you know, more opportunities to hear from more people is better. And we've got a compressed timeline. And so, you know, while people are, you know, encouraged to email us at that email and to talk to anyone on the task force, you know, it's just another chance for people to weigh in. But it's also more time. So I wanted to lay it out to the group. All right, I'm getting the vibe of it's really late and people are done with this meeting. So I'm not seeing that anyone has an objection to it. There's at least some sense that it could be a good thing to a good additional opportunity for us to hear feedback. I have no idea how many people will take advantage of it, but if the chairman is willing to host it, I'm gonna say, we should say, great.
Yeah, I land where Rakaya did too, so I'm fine.
Okay, okay. All right, so, yeah, all right, Cynthia, look at that, okay. We got some enthusiasm in the chat now. Okay, great. So, and I'm also seeing in the chat a comment around translation of our materials, which we have talked about, and thank you for that comment. We are working to translate the decks, and I will again be really transparent that these, because of our time frame and because we're all doing this on our volunteer time, and you know, I have anyway, which I'm very happy to be doing, that these decks are not ready in enough time in advance to have them translated in advance. I'm just going to be totally honest that I know that's not great practice, but it's just the reality. That said, we're working to translate them after the fact, so at least people can see them after the fact. So again, apologies for that. I know that's not ideal, and I definitely own that. Okay, looking at I think we've addressed the comments in the chat. So thank you for those of you who are interested in joining these additional information sessions the next few days. I will get you that info. Please email me if you haven't already, and look out for a follow-up email to this with more opportunities to spend more time together in small groups, digging into some of this. I appreciate everybody's level of engagement, and thank you so much. Have a good rest of your evening, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
I see you later. Thank you.